Alright, so hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Today we're gonna have a look at a Unity asset called Prefab scripting. Now, it's gonna be really helpful to most users long term, and it contains something which can save your time, which you can in turn use for other stuff, like let's say you just want to make your game look good and so on. Simply put up, Prefab scripting can save a lot of time in a huge way. So let's get started and let's see how this asset works. Now, right now behind the scene, I have just created a new scene in Unity, and then I have created a new plane, and then I have just changed the color of the plane to green just to make it look good. I'm just gonna rename the plane to ground, let's say. That just looks, and now that makes better sense. Okay, so let's just get started with the tools you get in the 3D prefabs. So in order to do that, I'm just gonna go ahead to Prefab script tab and then click on to 3D prefabs. That's gonna open the 3D prefabs window for you. Now, on first glance, you're gonna probably guess everything. You're gonna go ahead and then get the tools to create 3D character, which is basically a 3D FPS, a 3D player shooter, which is basically a 3D FPS which can shoot, a 3D destroyer, which is gonna destroy any game object on conditions like delay and so on. 3D look at, which is basically an object which points towards any object you specify. A 3D draggable object which can be dragged using a cursor. A 3D object follower, which is basically an object which follows another object. A 3D platformer. A 3D set movement, which basically sets movement or moves an object constant in a constant way, and also 3D set rotation, which is gonna set rotation of an object. Alright, let's go one by one into all of these tools. First off, getting started with the 3D character. All you have to do this to create a 3D character is just click on to 3D character button, and that is going to create a new game object called character 3D. Now, by default you're going to get by default in this game object you're going to get a script attached to it called character 3D. Now all you have to do is just drag and drop all the stuff which is specified right here. So first off, let me just go ahead and then create a nice little capsule which will be our player. I'm gonna go ahead and then set the transform of this to, let's say, 1, and that's about it basically. You can go also, because I am creating a 3D character right here, I need to have a character controller, or else the script won't function properly, and therefore you won't be able to move around, and the player won't function very well. So you need to have a character controller attached to the player by default, and you can see the message right here as well. Okay, so let's get going. I'm gonna go ahead and then drag the camera right here. I'm gonna drag the player right here, and that's basically it. You can now go ahead and then play your game, and you can see that the player can not only move, but also he can jump and do all of the stuff like that. Now basically you can see that the camera is not able to move. Now that's basically because I almost forgot to actually make the camera the child of the player. Now if I go ahead, save it and play the game, you can see that the camera moves along with the player, and not only that, it works really well. You can go ahead and then customize it in your own way. It functions very smoothly, and also you can see that the movement of the player is smoother, and that's something which you get right here. you get a smooth movement of the player, and the transition between and the controls are much smoother. With that done, that is how the player works. Let's go ahead and then create the second thing, which is basically 3D player shooter. Now that's basically the same as 3D character, but it has the ability to shoot. Now that's really not super difficult. All you have to do is just specify the bullet prefab. Now by default, prefab script has a bullet prefab attached to it, which is basically a red colored cube. You can go ahead, you probably might have to go ahead and then replace that bullet to any sort of custom bullet you have made. Now with that done, in order to actually create a nice little player shooter, you will have to go ahead and then drag in the player, the camera just like usual, and also drag the player right here, and you will also have to add a fire position. Now you can basically do that by adding a game object, an empty game object, and rename it as fire position, or you can rename it as anything you want. I'm gonna rename it as fire position, and I'm gonna change the transform to somewhere here. Now that's about it. You can go ahead back to character shooter object, which you have character shooter tool, and then just drag and drop the fire position. Now if you go ahead and play, you can not only move as a normal player around just as usual, but you can also shoot. Now as I just said, this bullet is not really attractive, and you might have to make your own custom bullet. But also something else to notice is that if you have a look at the bullet prefab, you'll get to know that when you go ahead and then shoot it, it's gonna stay there and then delete itself after some point of time. See there? That is because of another tool called 3D Destroyer, and I'm gonna go to that in a minute. But for now, this is how 3D shooter works. This is how 3D character in general works. Now going to the next part, which is basically 3D Destroyer. And now, as I mentioned before, this is used with the bullet to actually destroy itself after some time. Now you can use this for any sort of bullet and it works. You can use it for any game object and it destroys on conditions. Now you can use this for anything you want, but the function of this tool is that it's going to destroy any game object you specify after some time. It can even destroy itself after some time if you specify. Now that's basically how 3D Destroyer works. Let's give an example. Let's have an example. Let's say I need the ground to be destroyed after 3 seconds after the game has started. All I need to do is just go ahead, drag and drop the ground game object, and you can just say destroy on collision if you want. You can destroy when the game has just begun, but you can also destroy it on delay, and by default it's 3 seconds, and I'm gonna leave it default. Now you can see that after 3 seconds the plane just destroys itself. Basically, one example which probably comes into my mind is the bullet. You probably will have to destroy the bullet after some point of time if the bullet is being shot. So yeah, this can be helpful in a huge way. Now going on to the next prefab, we have 3D look at. Now what's this gonna do? It's basically gonna go ahead and then just turn towards the object you specify. Now this can have many use cases. Let's say you want the sun, for example, to have a nice little sunrise and sunset and so on, well, you can basically go ahead and then specify the sun to always look at an object, and that is enough to cause a nice little sunrise and sunset effect. Now let's take a simpler example in this case. Okay, so just now I just created a nice little cube and a sphere. Now what I want is that I need the cube to always look at the sphere. I need the cube to always point towards the sphere. Now this is a very vague example, but trust me, there are a lot of situations where you want your object to look towards something. Let's say you are creating an enemy. The enemy always has to probably look at the player, or maybe move towards the player, and so on. So you get my point. This is just a vague example right now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and then add a 3D look at tool into the hierarchy. I'm just gonna go ahead and then rename this. And now by default, if you have a look at this tool in the inspector, you will get a script attached giving you two options: target and look at. These two are basically the two objects which is involved in here. You need the target, which is going to be looked at the same time you need the object which is actually going to look at the target. So now I'm just gonna go ahead, select the look at tool, and then drag in the cube into the look at, and then drag in the sphere into the target. Now if I just save and then play the game, okay, now if I just go ahead and then select this sphere and then probably move it up somewhere there, and now if I go ahead and then play the game, you're gonna notice that the cube is pointing towards the sphere. Now you might not be able to notice this from the video. Let me make it clearer. Well, you can see that the cube is basically pointing towards the sphere, and that is exactly what look at is gonna do. Now let's go on to the next thing. I'm gonna go ahead and then create a 3D draggable object. This is basically an object which can be dragged. Now when you go ahead and then create this tool, you're gonna get a green color cube. Now if you go ahead and then play the game, okay, let me just make sure that I can see the cube while the game is going on. Now you can see that the cube is basically a cube, but you can go ahead and then drag it through left clicking. That's how simple it is if you want to create a draggable object. Now you can customize this further. Let's say you want to create a draggable character. In that case, all you have to do is just replace the cube with the character, and then that should literally just work for you. The character should now be draggable, and that's how simple draggable objects are. Let's go to the next tool we have right now, which is basically the object follower. Now let me go ahead and then create a cube and also a sphere. I'm gonna have them placed in two different positions, and now using the 3D follower tool, I'm just gonna go ahead and then drag the target which is actually gonna be followed. In this case, let's take the target as the cube, and then I'm gonna drag in the sphere as the follower. Now if I go ahead and then play the game, you can see that the sphere actually follows the cube, because the cube is basically the target and the sphere is the follower. You can further customize it by by changing the speed through which the follower actually follows the target. Let's say I want the speed of the follower to be 1. Well, you can just go ahead and play, and you can see that it follows the cube in a much slower speed, and that's basically what we need right now. And that's basically how it works. Now let's go into the next tool we have right now, which is the platformer. People spend a lot of time just coding the movement of platformer, FPS, and so on. Well, the real thing here is that you don't have to code that much. All you need is this asset. All you have to do now is just go ahead and then import this asset, and you're done. And you are done with your platformer movements. So let's put this in real life. Let's go ahead and then create a 3D platformer. Now behind the scenes, I just set up a long path through which the platformer can travel, and also some nice little cubes in the middle right here at the left side, because the cubes just make it easier to see, easier to notice that the player is actually moving. So now all I have to do now is just go ahead. So what I just did is just that I went ahead and then created. Now all I did was that I just created the 3D platformer tool. I just added the 3D platformer tool, and then I just went on to the platformer tool and then dragged and dropped in the player. Dragged and dropped in the player, dragged and dropped in the main camera. This is gonna basically make your camera always look at the platformer. Now this is helpful because of course the camera should always point towards the player, and therefore this is just gonna make sure that the camera is always gonna look at the player and not look anywhere else. And then in the platformer 3D script, you can go ahead, drag in the player, drag in the main camera, drag in the camera again for the position of the camera, and you can go ahead and also change the move speed and the camera transition. Out here in the player section, I have just created another empty game object called camera position. So that is where the camera should follow and land towards. That is where the camera should be. And if you have a look at it, camera position is right here. So that is where the camera is always gonna go ahead and land towards. So now this is how it works. If while the platformer is moving, because the camera position is the child of the player, even the camera position is gonna move along with the player, and therefore the camera is gonna follow the camera position. So in that way, so now if you go ahead and then play this game, you'll get this really smooth movement of the camera towards the player, and then really smooth movement of the player itself. So yeah, that's how it really works. All you have to do is just create your player, and then just create another empty game object and call it anything you want, and then just make sure that it's the child of the player, and then it's gonna be the place where the main camera is gonna be. And then just go ahead, create a platformer tool, and then make sure that the camera is gonna follow the camera position right here, and then the camera is also gonna look at the player. And also you can continue and then set the move speed and the camera transition speed. And that's how simple it is to create a nice little platformer. Let's explore more. Let's have a look at some other ones. And the last two tools which we're gonna have a look at is 3D set movement and 3D set rotation. Both of these tools are really helpful. Let's say you have a cube right here. Let me just go ahead and then delete this platformer, and then let's just create a nice little cube. Okay, so there you go, you have a cube now. So you need the cube to always be moving. Okay, so we have the camera right here. Let's go ahead and then just drag in the cube where the camera is. Alright, so now all you have to do, let's say you want to set movement to this cube which you have just created right here. Okay, so doing that is probably really easy when it comes to this. If you are using this asset, all you have to do is just say 3D set movement. That is gonna go ahead and then create the 3D movement tool and then just add the 3D movement tool in your scene. All you have to do now is just set the object which is gonna move. Basically, in our case, it's gonna be the cube. So we need the cube to move in this case, we want it to move for, let's say, the z-axis. We want it to move only in the z-axis. And then let's say I want to set the speed to 2. You can also go ahead and then say destroy. Let's say you are setting movement of a bullet, and let's say you want to destroy that bullet after some time. In that case, you can just check on to destroy on delay, and that is going to destroy on so many seconds you have set. So now if you go ahead and then play, you can see that the object is moving. You guys would probably not be able to see it because it's moving in a really low speed. I'm gonna set the speed to 10, or let's say -10. If you set it to -10, it's gonna move in the opposite direction. Now if you have a look at the object, you can see that it's moving, and after 5 seconds it's gonna destroy itself. Let's see, you can set it to 3 for now. So I'm gonna go ahead and then set the delay to 3 now, and then if you have a look at the object, it will perfectly destroy itself after perfectly 3 seconds. And that is how 3D set movement works. Now let's say you want to rotate the cube. Let's say you don't want to move it a lot, you want to rotate it. I'm gonna go into UI prefabs later on. Let's say you want to set the rotation of the cube to be, I don't know, whatever you want. So now that's also of course possible. All you have to do is just set rotate, is just add the set rotate tool and then drag and drop the object which you want to rotate into the script, and then just specify which axis you want to rotate it towards and set the rotation speed. You can also do the same thing which you did on set movement. You can go ahead and then destroy the object on delay. Let's say I want to destroy it after 3 seconds. I'm gonna pick that up, and yes, that's about it. If you go ahead and then play the game, you can see that the object is probably rotating a bit too fast, but it rotates itself and then destroys itself after some time. Let's say this speed is too much. I'm gonna set it to 1. Now if you have a look at the object, it is rotating in a slower pace and it destroys itself after perfectly 3 seconds. I want it to rotate even slower. Let's go with 0.1. Now if you have a look at the object, you can see that it is rotating in 0.1 second, in 0.1 pace, and it destroys itself after 3 seconds as usual. Now I think you guys will probably not see it if it's that far. Let me go ahead and then play now. You can see that it's rotating and it destroys itself after 3 seconds. and that is how 3D rotation works. Make sure you are sticking with the other releases of prefab scripting. Trust me, there are many other tools which are coming up, and all of those tools are really helpful to you guys. And by that we come to the end of this video. We have covered all the 3D assets which we have in the first release of prefab scripting. The link to the prefab script asset in the Unity store is in the description. You can go ahead and then check that out. And by that we finally come to the end of this video. I hope you really enjoyed. Go ahead and then like this video, share this video to other developers or other people who actually need this, and also subscribe now. I'll meet you in the next video. Goodbye.